Alien professor laughs at human's tiny knife, reaches its dramatic peak when the catastrophic plasma storm strikes earlier than expected. While sophisticated technological shelters fail spectacularly around them, Noah's hand-carved obsidian dome stands resilient against the onslaught. Inside, 3 survivors, including skeptics who once mocked him, watch in awe as his ancient human wisdom triumphs where advanced alien technology crumbles to dust. The crimson surface of Volcaris stretched endlessly beneath a bruised purple sky. Obsidian cliffs rose like jagged teeth from the blood-red landscape, their black surfaces reflecting the dying light of the planet's distant sun. In the distance, electric flashes illuminated gathering storm clouds, harbingers of the approaching plasma storm that would soon engulf this desolate training ground. Noah Briggs stood apart from the other cadets of the Galactic Exploration Academy. His eyes narrowed against the sulfuric winds that whipped across the volcanic plains. He was the only human in this advanced survival training cohort, a fact that never failed to draw curious glances and occasional whispered comments from his alien classmates, while the others busied themselves with calibrating sleek, cutting-edge equipment and unpacking their technological marvels. Noah's hand rested on the worn leather sheath at his belt. Inside lay his grandfather's carbon steel knife, 8 inches of honed metal with a handle of polished bone, darkened by generations of human hands. It was an anachronism in this era of neural tools and molecular disruptors. But Noah carried it with quiet pride. His grandfather's voice seemed to whisper from its worn handle. "The best tool is the one you understand completely." The assembled cadets represented a dazzling array of species from across known space. Thorno, a hulking Cache 4 with silicon-based musculature, adjusted the settings on his graviton saw, a device that could slice through most planetary materials by manipulating localized gravity fields. Nearby, a cluster of bioluminescent Aven cadets compared notes on their shared atmospheric processor, their feathered crests rippling with excitement as they discussed modifications. Among them was Sarah, whose silver-blue plumage caught the fading sunlight as she calibrated a molecular separation device. Supervising them all was Professor Grethen, a crystalline Zachriel, whose translucent body refracted the dying sunlight into prismatic patterns across the red dust. Known throughout the Academy for their uncompromising standards and apparent disdain for any approach lacking technical sophistication, Grethen was both feared and respected. The professor's multifaceted eyes missed nothing, cataloging each cadet's preparations with clinical precision. "Cadets, attention!" Grethen's voice resonated like glass under pressure, cutting through the ambient noise of equipment checks and nervous chatter. "Your survival assessment begins now." The scattered cadets formed a loose semicircle around their instructor, various appendages, tentacles, and limbs stilling as they awaited instructions. Noah took his place at the edge of the group, standing straight but unobtrusive. "Volcaris presents unique survival challenges," Grethen continued, crystalline arms gesturing toward the darkening horizon. "In approximately 5 planetary cycles, a Class 5 plasma storm will sweep across this region. Your assignment is simple. Each of you must create a shelter capable of withstanding the storm's intensity, using only your personal tools and the natural resources available." A murmur passed through the assembly, a mix of confidence and concern, depending on the cadet's equipment and experience. Noah remained silent, his face impassive. "This is not merely an academic exercise." Grethen's voice sharpened. "Class 5 plasma storms on Volcaris have been known to strip flesh from bone and vaporize unshielded technology. Your survival will depend entirely on your shelter's integrity." The professor's crystalline body shifted, refracting light in patterns that communicated severity to those species who could interpret such displays. "You have 5 cycles. Begin now." The cadets dispersed with purposeful energy, gravitating toward the obsidian cliffs that offered the most promising foundation for their shelters. Noah watched as anti-gravity platforms hummed to life, carrying equipment toward the black walls. Thorno activated his graviton saw, the air warping around its activation field. The Avens deployed atmospheric analyzers that floated like luminous jellyfish, seeking optimal locations based on predicted wind patterns. Noah simply walked toward a section of cliff face that the others had ignored, a portion marred by natural fissures and lacking the pristine smoothness that made for easier technological modification. He felt eyes following him, and not for the first time since joining the academy. Heard barely suppressed laughter. "Is that a metal splinter?" a silicon-based Jalorian cadet called out, multifaceted eyes fixing on the knife at Noah's belt. "Did you bring a pre-industrial artifact to a survival course?" Others joined in the amusement, tools momentarily forgotten as they registered the human's apparent inadequacy. Even Sarah, who had always been cordial to Noah, couldn't completely suppress a flutter of her crest that indicated bemused surprise. Professor Grethen drifted closer, crystal body pulsing with what Noah had learned to recognize as curious skepticism. "Cadet Briggs," the professor intoned, "do you perhaps have additional equipment in atmospheric storage?" "No, Professor," Noah replied evenly. "Just this." He unsheathed the knife, its blade catching the last rays of Volcaris's setting sun. Grethen's body resonated with a harmonic that translated as derisive amusement. "Most fascinating. Will the human next suggest using rope and flint as well?" The comment drew appreciative reactions from the other cadets, who quickly returned to their sophisticated preparations, dismissing Noah as an evolutionary curiosity, a relic of a species still clinging to physical tools in an age of neural interfaces and programmed matter. Noah sheathed his knife without response. He approached the obsidian cliff face, running his fingers along the natural fissures, testing the rock's temperature and composition. His eyes traced patterns invisible to most: stress lines, crystal formations, points of natural weakness. While the air filled with the whine of power tools and the chatter of excavation drones, Noah simply observed, occasionally tapping the rock face and listening to the resulting sound with closed eyes. As Volcaris's sun dipped below the horizon, casting the landscape in deep crimson shadows, the real work began. The night was punctuated by the mechanical screams of tools biting into obsidian and the occasional curse as equipment malfunctioned in the planet's unusual electromagnetic field. Near the base of the cliff, Thorno's graviton saw suddenly sputtered and died, its power core overloaded by an unexpected mineral concentration in the rock. The massive Cache 4 bellowed in frustration, powerful limbs slamming against the unyielding cliff face. Amid this cacophony, Noah worked in near silence. He had identified a natural seam in the rock face, a place where ancient geological forces had created a hairline fracture. With methodical precision, he inserted the tip of his knife into the narrow gap and applied pressure, not to cut through the obsidian, which would be impossible with steel, but to exploit the rock's natural tendency to cleave along crystalline planes. A sharp crack echoed through the night as a section of obsidian separated cleanly from the face. Noah caught the substantial fragment before it could shatter against the ground, setting it aside with care. He repeated the process, working with the rock rather than against it, understanding its structure and utilizing its inherent properties, while the others fought the obsidian with brute technological force. Noah partnered with it, reading its hidden language of pressure and fracture. By the time Volcaris's smaller moon crested the horizon, casting a pale blue glow over the landscape, Noah had removed dozens of precisely shaped obsidian pieces from the cliff face. He had begun to arrange them in a semicircular pattern, using volcanic clay from nearby thermal vents as a binding agent. The shelter taking shape was low to the ground, but remarkably solid, its pieces fitted together with the precision of a master stonemason. A shadow fell across his work, and Noah looked up to find Sarah hovering nearby, her atmospheric processor temporarily abandoned. Her feathered crest was raised in what Noah recognized as a sign of intellectual interest. "You're not using tools to shape the rock," she observed, her voice carrying the musical quality characteristic of the Avon. "I am," Noah replied, holding up his knife. "Just not the kind you're used to seeing." Sarah tilted her head, blue feathers catching the moonlight. "But the obsidian, it's cleaving so cleanly. How?" Noah gestured for her to come closer. "Look here," he said, pointing to a nearly invisible line in the rock face. "This is a natural stress fracture. The obsidian formed under tremendous pressure and cooled unevenly. It wants to break along these lines. I'm just helping it do what it already intends to." "Wants to?" Sarah's voice contained a note of confusion. "Rocks don't have intentions." "Figure of speech," Noah explained, returning to his work. "It's about understanding the material's natural properties instead of forcing it to conform to your needs." Sarah watched in silence as Noah inserted his knife into another fissure, applied careful pressure at precisely the right angle, and freed another perfect slab of obsidian. "Our professors never mentioned this approach," she finally said. "It's not as impressive as a graviton saw," Noah acknowledged with a slight smile. "But it works." As Sarah drifted back to her own project, Noah continued his methodical work. He collected volcanic fibers from nearby plant life, evolved to withstand Volcaris's extreme temperature fluctuations, and wove them into cordage. This he used to create a framework that supported the obsidian slabs from within, adding structural integrity to the growing shelter. The night deepened, and Volcaris's temperature plummeted. Many cadets retreated to the temporary climate bubbles they had established. Their work paused until morning. Noah simply built a small fire using flint from his pocket and dried volcanic moss, the flames casting dancing shadows across his emerging shelter. He used the firelight to check his knife's edge, carefully honing it against a piece of volcanic stone. Through the surveillance drones that constantly monitored the cadets' progress, Professor Grethen observed Noah's primitive techniques with growing interest. The crystalline alien's dismissive amusement had given way to a reluctant fascination. While the other cadets slept in technological comfort, Noah worked through the night, his hands moving with the sure confidence of ancient knowledge. By dawn, Noah's shelter had taken substantial form, a dome-like structure embedded in the cliff face, its entrance low and narrow, but its interior surprisingly spacious. He had incorporated natural ventilation channels that followed the rock's existing fissures, and a clever system of overlapping slabs that would disperse energy rather than absorb it, a critical feature for surviving plasma storms. As the other cadets resumed their work, the sounds of technological struggle filled the air once more. The Jalorian's molecular disruptor repeatedly overheated in the unusual radiation of Volcaris, requiring constant recalibration. A team of methane-breathing Ventari found their atmospheric converters struggling with the sulfur content of the local air, their tentacles writhing in frustration as they attempted modifications. The second day brought new challenges. The planetary magnetic field intensified unexpectedly, disrupting delicate electronic components and forcing many cadets to rebuild critical systems. Noah, relying on physical tools and natural materials, continued unaffected. Midway through the day, disaster struck. Thorno, having finally repaired his graviton saw, attempted to cut through a particularly dense section of obsidian. The tool's containment field fluctuated, then collapsed entirely. The resulting gravitic backlash sent the massive Cache 4 flying backward, his silicon-based body crashing against the unforgiving ground. A jagged wound opened across his chest cavity, exposing the crystalline organs beneath. Noah was the first to reach him, while others stood frozen in shock or fumbled with medical scanners. Noah knelt beside the injured alien, quickly assessing the damage. He removed his outer jacket, using it to stabilize Thorno's exposed organs and stem the leakage of silicon-based fluids. "Water," Thorno gasped, his voice distorted by pain. "Need water." Noah reached for his canteen, supporting Thorno's head as the alien drank. The Cache 4's silicon biology required immediate hydration to prevent crystallization of damaged tissues. A fact Noah remembered from xenobiology classes that many others had forgotten in the crisis. "We need to move him to shelter," Noah said to the gathered cadets. "The temperature's dropping again, and his system can't regulate in the open." Working together, they carefully transported Thorno to Noah's half-finished shelter. Despite its primitive appearance, the structure offered surprising protection from Volcaris's harsh elements. Noah arranged his bedding materials to insulate the injured cadet from the cold ground, then returned to his work with renewed urgency. As the second night fell, Noah refined his shelter's design. He carved drainage channels to redirect potential energy flows, reinforced the dome with a cross-hatched pattern of volcanic fibers embedded in clay, and sealed cracks with sulfur-rich mud that hardened to a cement-like consistency. Every addition served multiple purposes: thermal regulation, structural support, and protection against electromagnetic radiation. Professor Grethen made rounds among the cadets, evaluating their progress with critical eyes. When the crystalline alien reached Noah's shelter, there was a notable pause. Without comment, Grethen circled the structure, occasionally touching its surface with resonating appendages. "Your approach is unconventional, Cadet Briggs," the professor finally remarked. "Yes, Professor," Noah acknowledged, continuing to apply a mixture of volcanic clay and crushed obsidian powder to strengthen a seam. "The plasma storm approaches faster than anticipated," Grethen added. "You may have only 2 more cycles, not 3. Noah nodded, absorbing this information without visible alarm. "Thank you for the update, Professor." As Grethen moved on, Noah intensified his efforts. Inside his shelter, Thorno was recovering slowly, his silicon-based healing processes gradually sealing the damaged portions of his chest cavity. The injured cadet watched Noah's methodical work with growing respect. "I thought you primitive," Thorno admitted in the guttural tones of his species. "When I saw your metal tool, I believed you would fail." Noah smiled slightly as he fitted another obsidian slab into place. "Technologies change, but principles remain. Understanding materials, working with natural forces instead of against them. These ideas are older than any of our civilizations." "The Academy teaches us to overcome nature," Thorno said, his voice strengthening. "To bend environments to our will through superior technology." "Maybe that's why so many tools are failing here," Noah suggested. "Volcaris doesn't bend easily." By the third day, signs of the approaching storm dominated the horizon. Electrical discharges illuminated the distant clouds, and the air grew thick with charged particles that made unprotected skin tingle uncomfortably. Cadets worked with increasing desperation, their carefully planned schedules disrupted by equipment failures and the storm's accelerated timeline. Noah completed the outer shell of his shelter, adding a final layer of thermal insulation, using woven volcanic fibers treated with a natural resin he'd discovered exuding from rock fissures near thermal vents. The material formed a surprisingly effective barrier against both heat and electrical energy, properties Noah had tested by exposing samples to controlled electrical discharges from flint. As the day progressed, Noah crafted a door of interlocking obsidian plates that could seal his shelter completely. The design incorporated clever pressure release channels that would prevent the structure from imploding if external pressure suddenly increased, a common danger during plasma storms. By nightfall, many cadets were still struggling to complete their shelters. The atmospheric anomalies preceding the storm had rendered several technological approaches completely unworkable. A pair of hydrogen-breathing norites abandoned their half-finished structure entirely, requesting emergency extraction via the Academy's orbital shuttle, the first acknowledged failure of the exercise. Noah spent the final night refining details, testing seals, and ensuring that his wounded companion was comfortable. Thorno had recovered enough to sit upright, though he remained too weak to return to his own incomplete shelter. "You could have finished hours ago," Thorno observed, watching Noah meticulously check each seam of the shelter. "Why continue? The difference between surviving and thriving isn't in doing the minimum," Noah replied, his fingers tracing a hairline crack and marking it for reinforcement. "My grandfather taught me that preparation deserves your complete attention, especially when lives depend on it." The dawn of the fourth day brought ominous skies. The horizon had disappeared behind a wall of electrical storms, the plasma discharges now clearly visible as they arced through churning clouds. The air crackled with potential energy, and exposed metal surfaces occasionally sparked spontaneously. Professor Grethen's voice echoed across the training ground, amplified by emergency communicators. "All cadets, prepare for imminent storm impact. Projected arrival, 3 hours. Complete your shelters and seal yourselves inside. Emergency extraction is no longer possible due to atmospheric conditions." A wave of barely controlled panic swept through the remaining cadets. Tools whined at maximum capacity as final adjustments were made to technological shelters. Noah calmly completed his preparations, applying the last of his volcanic cement to critical seams and checking the pressure release channels one final time. As the deadline approached, other cadets began sealing themselves into their shelters, some complete, others worryingly unfinished. Noah stood at the entrance to his structure, surveying the darkening landscape. In the distance, he spotted Sarah struggling with her atmospheric processor, which had apparently suffered a catastrophic failure. The Avon's feathers were flattened in distress as she attempted to salvage essential components. Without hesitation, Noah jogged toward her position. "The storm's almost here," he called over the rising wind. "Is your shelter functional?" Sarah's crest rippled in negative patterns. "Containment field generator failed. Without it, the structure won't hold against plasma discharges." Noah glanced at her partially completed shelter, a technically impressive design that relied entirely on energy fields rather than physical barriers. "You need to evacuate. Now." "Where?" Sarah's voice carried the harmonic overtones of Avon distress. "Emergency extraction is unavailable." "Come with me," Noah said, gesturing toward his shelter. "There's room." Sarah hesitated, her multifaceted eyes darting between her failed project and Noah's primitive-looking structure. A particularly violent electrical discharge nearby made the decision for her. Together, they sprinted back toward Noah's shelter as the storm's leading edge began to sweep across the training ground. They reached the obsidian dome just as the first plasma tendrils touched down, instantly vaporizing exposed equipment left outside incomplete shelters. Noah ushered Sarah through the narrow entrance, then sealed the interlocking door behind them. Inside, Thorno had propped himself against the wall, his silicon features tight with tension. "Will it hold?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the growing howl outside. "It should," Noah replied, checking the seals one final time. The design disperses energy rather than trying to block it completely. The storm descended in full fury, transforming the world outside into a maelstrom of superheated plasma and electromagnetic chaos. Through tiny observation slits Noah had incorporated into the design, they watched as artificial shelters began to fail one by one. A Ventari structure collapsed when its atmospheric generators overloaded, the methane mixture inside igniting in a spectacular blue fireball. The Jalorian's molecular shield flickered and died, leaving their shelter exposed to the full force of the storm. Inside Noah's shelter, the temperature remained surprisingly stable. The obsidian walls heated slightly, but dissipated the energy through the network of channels Noah had incorporated. Occasional plasma discharges played across the surface, following the conductive paths he had deliberately created to route dangerous energy away from the interior. "How does it withstand this?" Sarah asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear as she studied the shelter's construction. "The energy levels outside should melt these rocks." "It's not trying to resist the storm," Noah explained, pointing to various features of the design. "These channels create paths of least resistance, guiding the energy around rather than through. The layered construction allows for thermal expansion without cracking, and these pressure vents equalize the atmospheric differentials that could otherwise implode the structure." Thorno made a sound that translated as grudging appreciation. "You built this partnership with the storm." Noah nodded. "Exactly. Fighting natural forces head-on requires enormous energy. Working with them, understanding their patterns, that requires knowledge and patience, but much less raw power." The storm raged for hours, its intensity exceeding even the Academy's predictions. Inside the obsidian dome, the three cadets shared water and emergency rations, conserving energy and monitoring the shelter's performance. Occasionally, Noah made minor adjustments to the pressure vents or reinforced seams that showed signs of stress. At one point, a particularly violent plasma discharge struck directly above them. The obsidian glowed, momentarily orange-hot, but the energy dispersed through Noah's carefully designed channels, leaving the interior untouched. Sarah's feathers rippled in astonishment. "Our instructors always emphasize technological solutions," she said quietly. "Force fields, energy barriers, molecular reinforcement. No one ever taught us this." "Technological solutions are powerful," Noah acknowledged, "but they're also fragile in certain conditions. They require constant energy input, precise calibration, specialized materials. Sometimes, the oldest approaches have advantages precisely because they evolved under constraints. Having to work with limited resources forces innovation of a different kind." As the night wore on, they listened to the occasional distress calls over the emergency channel, cadets whose shelters had failed, now exposed to the storm's deadly elements. The Academy's protocols were clear. No rescue attempts could be mounted until the storm passed. Some would not survive the night. Dawn brought an eerie stillness. The storm had finally moved on, leaving behind a transformed landscape. The three cadets cautiously emerged from Noah's shelter to survey the aftermath. The training ground resembled a battlefield. Technological components scattered and melted. Artificial structures collapsed or vaporized entirely. Only a handful of shelters remained intact, most of them showing significant damage. Noah's obsidian dome stood virtually unchanged, its black surface still cool to the touch, despite the electrical onslaught it had endured. Professor Grethen approached across the debris-strewn field, crystal body refracting the morning sunlight into rainbow patterns. "Cadet Briggs." The professor's voice resonated with a new harmonic undertone that Noah had never heard before, something that might, in human terms, be described as respect. "Your shelter performed exceptionally." "Thank you, Professor," Noah replied simply. "The principles you employed, working with natural materials, understanding inherent properties, energy dispersion rather than resistance, these merit further study." Grethen's crystalline form shifted in patterns that indicated deep consideration. "I will be recommending your approach for inclusion in the Academy's non-technological survival curriculum." Noah nodded, accepting the significant acknowledgement without elaboration. Beside him, Sarah and Thorno stood in respectful silence, their own perspectives permanently altered by their experience. As the surviving cadets gathered for extraction to the Academy's orbital facility, conversations buzzed with new awareness. The unquestioned superiority of advanced technology had been challenged on the red plains of Vulcaris, and the results could not be ignored. Weeks later, in the hallowed corridors of the Galactic Exploration Academy, a new display case appeared. Inside, mounted on a simple stand of polished wood, lay Noah's grandfather's carbon steel knife. Beside it, a small plaque read, "Understanding prevails where force fails." The display quickly became a point of interest for cadets of all species, a reminder that knowledge transcends technological advancement. When asked about his experience, Noah offered only the briefest of explanations. "I didn't fight the planet or the storm. I just paid attention to what they were already doing." As another class of cadets prepared for their Volcaris training mission, Professor Grethen could be heard instructing them to pack not only their advanced technological tools, but also to consider the Briggs approach, a term that had entered the Academy's lexicon, representing an alternative philosophy of survival based on observation, adaptation, and partnership with natural forces. Noah himself had moved on to advanced training, his quiet competence earning him new respect among species that had once dismissed humans as technologically underdeveloped. He still carried a knife at his belt, not as a statement or symbol, but simply as a tool that connected him to generations of human knowledge. The lesson of Volcaris spread through the Academy and beyond, a reminder that across the vast expanse of the galaxy, with all its dazzling technological marvels, sometimes understanding trumped innovation, and the oldest wisdom proved the most enduring. The Obsidian Shelter stood for years on Volcaris, outlasting countless storms, a monument to the principle that true mastery comes not from imposing one's will upon the universe, but from learning its rhythms and joining its dance. Cadets who visited the site often left changed, their perspective broadened by the simple dome that had outlasted the most sophisticated technologies the Academy could devise. And somewhere, on a distant Earth, an old man smiled, knowing his grandson had truly understood the most important lesson he'd tried to teach, that the best tool is not the most powerful or the most complex, but the one you understand completely. In time, Noah Briggs would become an instructor at the Academy himself, teaching a new generation of explorers that across the infinite diversity of the cosmos, certain principles remained constant. That knowledge was the true foundation of survival, and that sometimes the quietest approach made the most profound impact. His legacy would be not in technological innovations or academic papers, but in the lives saved by cadets who learned to see beyond their technological dependencies and recognize the wisdom embedded in the universe itself, a wisdom accessed not through force, but through patient observation and respectful partnership. And on training grounds across 100 worlds, instructors would tell the story of the human with the knife who taught the galaxy to listen before commanding, to observe before acting, and to find strength not in domination, but in harmony.